Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. It's great to be here. Today I will tell you about the top 5 mistakes that I noticed during my career so far that data-driven organizations make when they try to create metric systems. A few words about me. I'm a psychologist. I worked as a researcher in psychology of language. However, I decided that academia is not the place to be for me. It's extremely difficult, so I switched to business, and I've been doing product analytics since 2014, and recently I have founded, together with Iga Mościchowska, Asian Center. If you want to learn more, please see our LinkedIn, and let's get to it. So, first, about the method, how I did it. I started with generating a list of ideas, stuff that I see every day when I work, when I talk with people, what can go wrong with metrics. And then, after I had this list, it was about 25, 30 items, I evaluated them based on 3 criteria. So the first criteria was popularity, how often this happens. The second was wasted resources, how much you lose if you make this mistake. And the third one was missed opportunities, how much you lose indirectly because you're looking in the wrong places. And on the 5th place, the 5th worst mistake, is missing metrics strategy. Like a short trivia, did you know that Michael Phelps has so many gold medals in the Olympics that if he was a country, he would be 35th most decorated country ever in Olympics, and he has no strategy. You should have a strategy. How do you know that you're doing this? Well, the first thing that you should do is you should notice that your metrics are selected ad hoc. You don't really think about any kind of strategy in metrics, which is funny because metrics are used very often to generate strategy, but they are not used very often as a subject of a strategy. Then the second thing that happens is that you have metrics that stay forever. Once you create a metric, it never changes. And I observed it a lot of times. When a metric works, you don't iterate on it. It is a mistake. Then you have no expiration date for metrics. You never plan obsolescence for metrics. Let me give you an example. When you're in a growth phase of your product, what you want to do is you want to measure new users. You want to measure some kind of return on investment from marketing. But then as your product grows, as it becomes more stable, mature, you stop needing these metrics. You should switch to measuring how much you earn from every person or how engaged they are. So you should modify your metrics as the product evolves. So yeah, as I mentioned, you don't iterate on it. And then you know that you do it because you have no long-term measurement plans. So you basically don't think about long-term strategy of your measurement, how much resources you're going to need, how you're going to use it. And when I thought about it at first, I was curious, to see what happens when I think about it some more, and I discovered that actually nobody does it. No company that I ever worked with consciously thinks about data strategy, which is strange. I mean, it's an area of business like any other, right? Then there are some wasted resources, but not too many. Usually when you select a metric and it does the job ad hoc, it will do the job long term. And you don't need to maintain or manage it too much, so you don't waste too many resources. And the problem is you miss opportunities. If you don't iterate on your KPIs, it's like you don't have, it's as if you are tunnel visioned. You are only looking at one direction. Different metrics set your vision to different places. If you don't iterate, you miss the opportunities. So altogether, I scored a 20 out of 30. However, the badge of the most popular mistake goes to this one. Just out of curiosity, does anyone here have a strategy for metrics? Nobody. One, yes, one, we have one. Very good. Congratulations, you're the first one. Okay, why it's a mistake? To sum it up, business, strategy, market, customer group, they all change. Your metrics should change, should reflect it. And how to avoid it? Simple, set strategy. Think about metrics as a business process that you should actively manage. Think about them as if they had life cycle, because they do, of creation and elimination. Now, number 4, data democratization. Okay, I'll explain this meme in a second. Now, you might think, wait, what? Data democratization? Actually, Yes, it is a mistake. Let me dive deeply into it. The first problem, the first sign that you have it is that you grant access to data, raw data, to everyone. Everyone can have access to data. Moreover, everybody is expected to run their own research. I mean, it sounds great on paper, doesn't it? And everyone can define and introduce the new metrics into your metrics system. And the problem is, like the horsey that you can see here, the left-hand side are metrics suggested by analysts and researchers. The right-hand side are metrics suggested by people who are not specialists. There is a good reason why data analyst, why UX researcher, product researcher are separate professions. It's difficult. And to get to the scoring, it's not very popular. Everybody wants to have it for some reason. When I first heard about it, I thought, ooh, such a beautiful idea. However, when you do it, boy, do you waste resources. Because not only you miss on, you let everybody, so you have to provide everybody with tools, with access to the data, which generates costs. I mean, tools for analytics are not cheap, but also you generate huge alternative cost. People who are specialists in managing product and in designing it waste their time doing suboptimal research. So they don't do good research usually because they're not specialists, and they waste time not doing things they were hired to do. So it's just such a huge resource sink. If you do it, I hope you have a lot of money. And then missed opportunities, not too many, because if you do a lot of research, actually you will come across some things that are interesting or important from time to time, so you don't miss too many opportunities, which is good. Altogether, I give it a 21 out of 30 points, and this is the most wasteful practice that I can think of. Now, just to sum it up, why it's a mistake. As I mentioned, research is difficult, and the alternative cost is huge. When I observe it from a closer perspective, it seems so wasteful. Please don't do it. Instead, focus on what's really important. You don't measure stuff, you don't create metrics for them to be there. You create it to get knowledge, and what you should democratize is access to useful knowledge. Leave data to specialists, leave research to specialists, but make sure that everybody who makes any decisions about products has full access to every single insight that they produced. This is what should be democratized, not data. Another problem, narrow focus. So you know that you do it when, for example, you have a dashboard with KPIs and a single area is overrepresented. The picture should give you an idea of what's going on usually. And it's like, we're focused on money. Quite often you may hear that, what's your strategy for this year? Oh, we're going to grow our conversion by 20%. How are you going to do this? I don't know. This is not a good strategy, and this is reflected in narrow focus of metrics. Another thing that might be a problem is when different teams, different parts of the organization are obsessed over their own metrics, their own ways of doing things. So, for example, the C-suite is obsessed about finances, financial metrics. The product only cares about engagement, but because they don't have too much influence over the product other than the engagement stuff, so why bother? The marketing teams only look at ads, at conversion, at impressions. And therefore, you miss a big picture. That's how you know that your focus is too narrow. Now, when it comes to popularity, it's quite popular. The bigger the organization, the more it happens. I think that it's because in bigger organizations, you lose this feeling of influence of other areas. And when you combine it with politics inside the organization, you just don't want to overstep your boundaries. You don't want to make C-suite angry, or you don't want to start fighting with marketing over their ideas. So you just stick to your own area and you just measure your stuff, all right? I mean, what's wrong with it? Not much. You don't waste many resources because you measure what's important. However, you miss a lot of opportunities. And that's why it's so high on the list. So that's 22 out of 30 in my scoring. And I think this is the single most dangerous thing you should do. So focus only on a narrow area of business, because this is like the tunnel visioning of yourself. Why it's a mistake? Well, because if you don't measure something, you won't know it exists. You may just miss some obvious things that you could do with your product if you don't combine things from various areas, or if you don't measure them at all. That's pretty obvious. And how to avoid it? Well, first, make sure you cover all your areas, all areas in your product with metrics, and make sure you do it in a nice, democratic, inclusive fashion. So make sure that if you have marketing operations, they have their own KPIs that they understand and that they can share with everybody else. When you have finances, they have their own metrics that can be communicated, and so on and so forth. And always aim at getting a big picture. Try to get the people who know the metrics together into a single place and get them to talk about the metrics. Oh, we've noticed that, for example, I don't know, our gross revenue has been falling for the past week. Yeah, and we've noticed that our ad revenue has been, ad spending has become stable, but retention from ads has become lower. And then the guy from the tech team can come and tell, yes, we've had this bug that for some people, we don't know for whom yet, there was this huge increase in website loading time, right? And then you put the pieces together and you're like, oh, okay, so we have to focus on fixing the loading time because this will fix our problems in finances marketing, right? You should always do this, always get a big picture. Knowledge likes being spread out and being cross-pollinated. Number 2 on my list, it's hoarding metrics. What's wrong about it? How do you know you do it? The first thing that you know that you'll be doing it is that you think that data is oil of the 21st century. I have to disappoint you, it's not. For everybody, data are just numbers, are tables with numbers, with words, with utterances told by people with recordings. And as such, it's useless. You can use ChatGPT to generate infinite amount of data, almost infinite. Data is more like these pieces of data are more like these small pieces of craftsmanship that you then should use in an orderly fashion. You should put it together into a very complex machine analytical machine, that ultimately will give you answers to your questions. Data is not as simple as physical resources. The second thing that you're doing it wrong when you have a lot of metrics that are common handies. It's a difficult word to translate from Polish. Like when something can come in handy, you say przyda się, which can be put into a noun, przyda się. So you have a lot of przyda się, you have a lot of common handies. These are metrics that you are sure that are useful, but you cannot tell how exactly, or that you can tell how exactly, but you're not sure when you're going to use it. A metric should be both. Something that you know how to use, and at the same time that you know when you use it. If you don't have both, you won't use this metric. It's not a good metric. So don't hoard common handies, because your attention span is limited. Be good to your attention span. Then another problem that you will identify when you identify you do this is that you have some metrics that have never been used to make a decision. You have these beautiful dashboards, you have these metrics that seem quite cool, quite interesting, and then as soon as you start thinking about them, you're like, oh, but what can I do about them, right? Or maybe even you know that you can do something about it, but you never used it to take a single decision. This is a useless metric. You don't need it. Stop looking at it. And you have plenty of old unused dashboards. You have like in your Tableau or Power BI or Looker Studio, wherever, you have a lot of dashboards and you don't dare to delete them because once every 2 years somebody looks at them and maybe uses it to make 5% of an important business decision, or maybe not. This also means that you're hoarding. And finally, this is an extreme scenario, but it does happen more often than I thought was possible. You forget definitions of metrics. You measure something, you look at a dashboard, and you just happen to forget how this metric was defined. The name doesn't ring a bell. It's not documented anywhere. It's there. It looks interesting, but you don't do anything with it. That's how you know you're hoarding metrics. Now, it's very popular. There is something about data that we tend to think about it as a physical resource. So we tend to hoard it just like we hoard physical resources because they may come in handy. It's an extremely strong human behavior. We just hoard stuff that we feel are useful, right? It doesn't work with data, though. We waste a lot of resources because the data has to be generated, has to be stored, has to be maintained. It has to be extracted, transformed, put into practice. So the more data you have, the more expensive every single analysis you make will be. But you don't miss too many opportunities, although don't get tricked by it, you still do miss opportunities. Why? Because if you hoard everything, you hoard metrics, it's much more difficult to find out subtle connections between the metrics, the big picture, and your attention gets focused on too many things at once. So you don't have this focus on the important stuff. So you still miss opportunities, even though you have everything. In practice, you don't look at it. So it's as if you didn't have it. You have illusion of having the knowledge, not knowledge. And altogether, I give it 23 out of 30. No badges for hoarding metrics. It's an all-rounder. It's just a bad practice. Why it's a mistake? Yep, I think I mentioned it more than I should have. Data is not similar to physical resources, and it generates costs. How to avoid it? Manage your metrics. So it's connected to the previous steps, and it will make things much better. Just think about your metrics, and every time you have a metric, think, do I need it? Where should it be? What should I do with it? Manage your data, and be cruel to your data. If it's useless, just throw it away. It's just a temporary resource. Okay, now, before we get to number 1, let me give you 2 honorable or honorary mentions. The first one is using NPS, Net Promoter Score. How do you know that you use NPS? Well, you use NPS. So you have an NPS as a key metric. And then you use NPS as a source of knowledge about user satisfaction. Let me remind you the question for the NPS. On a scale of 0 to 10, assess the likelihood of recommending our product to your friends. And there is everything wrong with this question. And what it definitely doesn't do is it doesn't tell anything about satisfaction. It tells you something about word-of-mouth marketing, but even there, it doesn't work. To answer this question, you have to think about being in a social situation, and it can be anything. It may be a social situation where you drink vodka, where you speak with at the water cooler. It could be anything. Then you have to imagine speaking about a product like Windows 10. Why not? I'm drinking vodka, I'm talking about Windows 10. And then you have to imagine yourself recommending or not your product to this other person. There's so much mental exercises going on in there that you just cannot tell what NPS measures exactly. Don't do it. And you get bonus points. You get bonus points when you measure your workers' performance based on NPS. So when you have a customer-facing team and you measure NPS from customers about the team, you're doing bad stuff. This poor guy here, he had his NPS results just announced. And the problem with NPS is that it's super volatile, or to use simpler words, super wobbly. So if you have 50 answers to an NPS, and when you're a customer service person, you get 20 to 50 every month, usually. Actually, if you get 25 points, if you had a different set of 50 people. So, just due to pure randomness, you could actually get scores from everywhere between -10 to +60. That's how volatile it is. The only thing that NPS does when you measure it in your workers is you demotivate them as hell. Don't do it. Now, it's quite popular, unfortunately. I have a crusade against NPS. I don't like it. You waste some resources because you have to measure it. You have to spend some money and time measuring something that, well, is not very good. And you miss a few opportunities, not too many. So it's a 90 out of 30. Almost made it to the list, but not exactly. And why it's a mistake? Well, nobody knows what it measures. It's extremely volatile. There are cultural differences. There's so much more going on in NPS. I began as a fan of this metric, and after some time, I understood that there is nothing to be fan of. And how to avoid it? Try to use CSAT instead. At least when you measure satisfaction, ask users about satisfaction. How satisfied are you with Windows 10? That's a much better way to understand user satisfaction. And don't ever attempt to use it to assess your employees. Please don't. If you do it, you just create an army of stressed people with no real impact on the stuff that measures their performance. You don't want to do this like the Wi-Fi password, just be kind. And being kind is not using NPS to assess your employees. The second honorable mention is worshipping metrics. This is a quote that visualizes it quite nicely. In God we trust, all other must present data. As an analyst, I know it might sound strange, but don't do this. You know that you do it when you require data to make all of your decisions. So you don't do any any decisions if you don't have data to back it up. Then you know that you do it when your analysts say that they don't need too many resources, that they're like, if you ask them, hey, do you have everything you need? They are like, yeah, there are a few extras that we need, but it's just fine. Whenever a team tells you that they have all the resources they need, it means they have too much resources, always. No exception here. Analysts, if they say they have everything they need, they have too much. Like, restrictions produce creativity. Restrict people resources so that they can get creative with it, frugal, right? If our analysts have everything they need, you might have overdone it. Then qualitative data is considered defective. In some organizations, qualitative data gets this bad press. Not many people listen to it. People think that qualitative data is bad, and it's not true. Qualitative data is the only way to understand answer to the why question. No quantitative analysis can answer why. You have to run a qualitative research to get answer to this question. And also qualitative data gives you a great idea about how people do stuff. Quantitative data is not the best at it. You can do it, but it's difficult. But qualitative data, to understand how people do something, you get answer straight away. You just look at a person doing something, and you're like, ooh, well, they don't see this as a call to action. So, yeah, it's a good thing. And you also know that you're doing it when you use your intuition, and every time you do it, you think it's a faux pas, that you shouldn't use your intuition. You should. When you ask a mathematician, like, there is no strictest science, there is no more scientific science than mathematics, right? When you ask a mathematician what's important in their work, there are two things. The first thing is, mathematicians say analysis is important. Ability to show, to pinpoint logically way that they get from the question to the solution. And the second thing, equally important for them, is intuition. Why? Because intuition can give you a way to get from point A to point B. Intuition is a way to generate ideas based on your overall life experience and work experience. And intuition is an important input for research, for any research, and for any decision making. While I admit it's incomplete, it's sometimes wrong, it's much faster and especially much cheaper than using data to take every single decision. How does it score? It's not very popular, fortunately. You waste a lot of resources. You put too much resources into analytics and data, and you spend too much time on measuring things. I mean, there is a healthy balance how much you should measure. It goes overboard. This is not a good way. And you do miss some opportunities because you don't get qualitative data. You don't use your intuition that can, guide you towards completely novel ideas. So again, it's a 19 out of 30. It almost made it to this list, but not exactly. And as I mentioned, it's a mistake because you cannot answer why or how using quantitative data, and qualitative data will give you the answers. And in order to avoid it, learn more about qualitative data and learn more about the role of intuition in decision-making. There are some great psychological research about intuition, and once you understand how it works, its limitations and its capabilities, you'll make better decisions, as simple as that. I use intuition all the time, and I find it great as a starting point for any exploration, any analysis. And now, the top one mistake that everybody does in metrics: having meaningless metrics. I think this is a winner, hands down. When I first started thinking about it, I couldn't even put it in words. And then this term on my list evolved, and it turned out into this statement. And as soon as I wrote it down, I understood, oh my, yeah, that's the problem at the moment. How do you know you do it? You begin research with metrics instead of questions. So you're like, ooh, I have to measure CTR in my new ad campaign, and I have to measure conversion RPPU from them. Not like, I wonder how my campaign is performing, right? So when you begin with metrics, when you think that the metrics will answer your question, ask the question first. Make sure that you measure the right metrics. You can easily miss something important when you do it. You have no clear goal behind metrics. You measure them because competition do it, because they're interesting, but you don't think about metrics as functional, as having something, some deeper sense, as answering some actual business needs. And finally, you use metrics because software provided it for free. So you have it in your Google Analytics, you have it in your Amplitude, you have it in your Mix panel. And guys, it's not a good idea, guys, girls, people, no. It's like going to McDonald's where there is, like this free Coca-Cola, drink as much as you like, so you get a bottle and you chug it like 2 liters of it at the time. It doesn't sound healthy, does it? So the same goes on here. It's not healthy. Just because something is free doesn't mean you need it. And then again, we get to this metric hoarding, right? And finally, you have vanity metrics. There is a lot of talking about vanity metrics. I think that it's a bit difficult to put it in words, but the way I think about vanity metrics is that they don't have too much in common with actual vanity. I think it's a term that actually describes metrics that are not actionable. So you think about metric, and then you ask yourself, okay, what can I do with it? And the answer is emptiness. You don't know what to do with it. Well, that way, what you get is you get a vanity metric, a metric that is not actionable. So that's how you know that your metrics are meaningless. How popular it is? It's very popular. I bet that most of you have at least one metric that can be described using word meaningless. You don't understand why it's there. It's calculated. You've never used it to make a single decision. You just don't know anything about this metric. And from my experience, they're endemic. They're everywhere. Because you don't iterate, you don't set strategy, you hoard metrics. Meaningless metrics are everywhere. A metric system, a system of metrics that has 5 metrics, but all of them are meaningful, intertwined, and you understand all of them good, is much better than having 50 metrics and hoping to find something in there and trying to fish out for meaning. Also, bonus problem is that you actually waste your time analyzing noises. The more metrics you measure, the more randomness you have in metrics, and the more likelihood you have of just analyzing noise, coming across something that's not really there, just because you measured 50 things and one of them turned out to be positive. Then you have missed opportunities. You don't miss too many opportunities, but it's the same problem as with hoarding metrics. Because you have so much stuff to think about and to interpret, you do miss out on some opportunities if your metrics were clearer and easily understood. So altogether, I give it a 24 out of 30. It doesn't get any badge, but it doesn't need to. It's a bad practice. Now, just to sum it up, why it's a mistake? The metrics are useless if they don't point you in a valuable direction, and you should always ask yourself, what valuable knowledge does the metric provide? And if you don't know the answer to it, throw it away. It's a garbage. You don't need it. Don't hoard it. Don't waste your attention on something that is meaningless. And only focus on the metrics that are useful. When thinking about metrics, be an engineer. Try to engineer a machine that gives you most knowledge with the least amounts of parts, where parts are metrics. And that's how you do analytics. So, if you liked what you saw, feel free to follow us, Asian Center, on LinkedIn. And add me on LinkedIn. And I hope you learned something interesting and useful today. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Michał.